Welcome to the Asure-ology Show, a growth hacker's guide to human capital management with your host, Mike Vannoy. Each week, we bring you experts in human resources, employment law, accounting, benefits planning, and more to build productive organizations. You'll gain practical guidance for your business. You'll be alerted to the latest news and mega trends that impact small and mid-sized companies. We'll give you the hands-on information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, the strategies you need to win the war for talent, and much more, so you can focus on what you do best, growing your business. Enjoy the show.
Recruiting and hiring tips. Our small business survey results are in, and this is your opportunity to compare your business to other companies. Got a special guest today. If you're a regular watcher of the show, you know Mary Simmons. She's our own Vice President of HR Consulting at Asure. She's a SHRM certified professional, and for the last 8 years, she's been an adjunct professor at the New York Institute of Technology. Prior to that, Mary was the Director of HR for a 55-year-old HR consulting firm in New York. Welcome, Mary.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, so this is super cool. We've been planning this for a long time. We wanted to set about to find out what were the human resource, I'll call it the people practices and policies of America's fastest growing companies. Also, what were the practices of companies who are struggling to grow? So here's what we did. We put together a survey. It was 8 sections from recruiting to hiring all the way through post-employment. In each of those sections, we asked 5 questions around what were their practices, HR practices in these areas, right? From there, we asked the final question, describe last year. Were you a fast growth company, a growth company? Were you flat, or was it, unfortunately, a down year? And then we compared all these results. So we can definitively say, based on over 2,000 small businesses who responded to our survey, we can definitively say these are the HR practices of companies who are growing the fastest, and these are the HR practices of people who are struggling to grow. And I think, spoiler alert here, those businesses with the best, I'd say best-in-class HR practices, no surprise, are the fastest growing companies. And those companies struggling to grow. Now, of course, there's a million reasons, marketplace, products, innovation. I mean, there's a million reasons why a company might struggle. But when you compare the results of over 2,000 business, 2,065 to be exact, the data is really clear. The fastest growing companies have great HR practices. And forget the word HR, they have great people practices to attract and develop and retain the best talent. Mary, any comments you want to have before we kind of jump in and we start talking about the first 2 topics of this survey, which is recruiting and hiring?
I'm just as excited as you are. First of all, to have that many people respond is amazing. And, I'm asked all the time, what's the compliance on this issue or that issue? And I love to be able to add best practices. And here we have this amazing document to help employers. It's a cheat sheet to people practices, as you said. So I'm really excited to go through this with you. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, and there's an awful lot about HR that is kind of black and white. There's legalistic compliance things. There's also a lot that's kind of, dare I say, the soft stuff. Maybe the most important stuff is the soft stuff. But here's some really hard-hitting, concrete data that tells us if you want to be a fast-growing company, this is what the leaders do. I think it really creates just a blueprint for what small businesses should follow for HR. Okay, let's go talk about the first one. Really interesting finding here. So 82% of the fast growth companies use job boards to post new openings compared to just 55%, barely over half of businesses that experienced a down year. So 82% versus 55%. Clearly the fastest growing companies use job boards. That sounds so simple, but why is that such a big deal? And why do you think there's such a gap there, Mary?
I kind of can audibly hear the audience going, what are you talking about recruiting and hiring, and leaning forward in their chairs, because this is just so important right now. And you're right. This is kind of like a moment, but we'll add to this as we have in the past. It's not just posting it. What are you posting on that job board? What job boards are you using to post, right? So these organizations, those fast growing organizations that are using the job boards, are using them consistently. They're using them even when they don't have an opening, right? So a lot of us are just posting a job. I fill it with Mike Vannoy, the great Mike Vannoy, as my, marketing director. And then I pull that job down. And that's probably not the best practice. So there's a lot of information around these answers from these fast growing. They're posting on the job boards in a consistent manner, using employment brands, making the application process very easy for the candidates, right? So they're not losing people who are like, oh, I'm not going to spend an hour filling out all this paperwork before I even have the job. So I love the statistic, even though you're right, it's kind of a dull moment where it's like, yeah, of course I have to post on job boards, but how are you posting on job boards? What job boards, when, and how does that application come into your organization?
Well, I just think about my own life as an entrepreneur and businesses that I'm currently involved in. Some of the job boards are expensive, right? And so,
yes.
If I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a small business, and I'm just working my tail off, grinding it, trying to make a living and trying to grow my business, I can understand the hesitancy in putting up the money. You mean I'm going to pay X amount for resumes of people that might not even show up to the interview? That's right. Maddening, and it feels very expensive. But you know what's really, really, really expensive? Hiring the wrong people that don't help you grow your business, right?
That's right.
And this one just screams at me, and I'm kind of with you. It feels like, well, okay, thank you, Captain Obvious. You can hire more people by using job boards.
Yeah.
The correlation is not hiring more people, because presumably these companies who had quote unquote a down year, they filled the jobs with people. But did they fill them with the right people? Were those people as productive as they could have been? When you average out across over 2,000 companies, when 88% that are fast growing use the job boards, 55% don't, it seems the data is clear that spending the money on the job board is worth it, because they're getting better talent, they're getting better employees that are simply more, presumably, they're more productive. Right. That's why.
Right. And they're filling jobs, period. Right. We can't make widgets or serve food without the right amount of employees. So if it takes a little bit of an investment to fill those jobs, to take our business to the next level, we need to do that. But what we're hearing is, I can't do it. I can't find the people. Well, are you using the job boards and using them appropriately?
Yeah. All right. Let's unpack the next one here. So the majority, 50% of growing businesses use applicant tracking software to filter applicants. So the first question was just, do you use job boards? Yes or no, period. Now we're talking about actual software that kind of filters and sifts through all the resumes. So 50% of growing businesses use applicant tracking. Just 40% of businesses that failed to grow last year, the down year folks, use applicant tracking software. So 57% versus 40%. You're almost like pushing 2/3, a little more than a third. It's a big gap. What do you think the root cause is there, Mary?
Well, this ties into the job boards, right? So if you're using the job boards, but you're not tracking where your best applicants are coming from, which your applicant tracking system will show you, right? So if you're posting to multiple job boards, the applicant tracking system is going to say, Joe, Scott, Mary, and Mike all applied for your sales position. And the first 3 came from Indeed, and the last one came from Career Builder, right? If you're not using applicant tracking to figure out, where your best people are coming from, how long the job is sitting out there, right? So I advertised the sales position for 3 months and I got 50 resumes. Out of that 50, I brought 20 in and I hired 2, right? you got to do some statistical analysis, but you're not doing that by hand, Mike, right? You're not going to write that on a pad, and you're not going to even do an Excel spreadsheet. Would be too time consuming. And that's why the applicant tracking system is really useful there. But it's also useful for our clients that are using our applicant tracking. It's going to take that candidate that you now want to hire, and it's going to put them right into your payroll system, your HRIS system, and just look, time is money. And this software is designed to save you time, but also to give you these statistics to help you make smarter hires.
Yeah, 100% with you. And I think you're right, lumping the first two topics together, right? Job boards, applicant tracking systems. The way I kind of step back and think about this as an entrepreneur is, are you willing to stick money? Because these things aren't free. And we don't sell either, right? So we don't have a dog in this hunt. But are you willing to invest money into the front end of your recruiting process to find the best talent? And the data is crystal clear. The companies who are growing the fastest, whether it's the applicant tracking software in and of itself versus the job board in and of itself, clearly there is at minimum there's a mindset that they're willing to spend money on the front end of this process to whether it's attract or decide who's the best, whatever goes into this to get the best, most productive employees. And it's working because those are the companies that are growing.
Absolutely.
Next one here that I want to hit, and this is a center of the bullseye for you to hit here, Mary. We talk about this all the time on this show.
I know.
70% of companies that had a down year have written job descriptions for each opening. That's actually might sound like a decent number, 70%. Okay, that's by far the majority. But 91% of the fast growth businesses have written job descriptions for every opening. So a 21% improvement. You talk all the time the importance of having written job descriptions. Explain to me why the gap, in your opinion, between 70% of people who didn't grow and shrunk last year versus 91% of those who are fast growers have job descriptions. How does that manifest itself?
Yeah, so in a couple different ways, and I'm an HR geek, so I love job descriptions for many reasons. But for this reason, you're using that job description as your basis to write a nice, targeted, sexy ad to attract the right people for your position. You're not cutting and pasting your job description into an ad, but you're using the majority of the information from that job description to write your ad that's going to go on your job board. And without having that job description, how are you even writing the ad? Are you sitting with the people in your office and going, hey, we have a sales position that's open. Hey guys, let's just throw something up there. Well, I think we can all see where that would be ineffective. And I think the other thing that we want to consider here, and I'm reading into the data a little bit, but allow me this, that I'm guessing the down year written job descriptions may not have been updated for a couple of years. So they might not be as accurate to give a good job preview. So it's very important when we interview candidates that we also give them a job preview. This is what the position will look like. This is what you'll be doing. And that has to be reflected in the ad. That helps you get better candidates. But, oh, by the way, you're also using that job description to create targeted interview questions. And I know that's out of the scope here, but I really think that it's tied in, Mike, because of that 91%, is a pretty high number. And it's no mystery to me why, that matches up with the fast growth businesses.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a little red line of thread that kind of stitches through all these. That I think it's reasonable to conclude that the companies who do more of X, use more of Y software, have follow this, what I think what everyone would consider to be a best practice. I don't think it is anybody would say it's a bad thing to have job descriptions, right? But the companies who do more of it overwhelmingly are the fastest growing companies in America. It just, period, right? And the companies who have the down years, again, there might be a million great reasons. You might have great people practices and still have a down year because of market forces. But averaged across 2,065 businesses, the data is clear. Those who have the most thoughtful HR practices are the fastest growers. And you have to be forward leaning in your HR and people practices to write the job description in the first place, to then have that job description so it's a foundation for the job posting, so that you now understand the criteria in which you will filter using applicant tracking software. Because to use those two tools without this one, I mean, they all link together. So
absolutely.
Next one I thought was kind of interesting.
Agreed.
The fast growers, they outperform, they're better, but this is one area where we all kind of suck, and it's a little bit scary for folks. And I know what it's like to white knuckle it as an entrepreneur running your business. Am I or am I not compliant? Here's the stat: 1 in 3 businesses that did not grow last year, they're uncertain if their job postings are compliant with federal, state, and local laws. So 1 in 3 are not. A third of people not growing. They're not confident that they're following the law here. It's only 1 in 4 of businesses that are the fast growers. They're not sure, right, if they're compliant. To me, this is an area. There's a difference, perhaps, between am I attracting? Am I finding? Am I filtering? Am I hiring the right people to help me grow my business? But am I also doing that in a way that's compliant? And this is an area where the people with the better people practices, they are the fast growers. They're better, 1 in 4 compared to 1 in 3. But it's not night and day. To me, this is a giant red flag for all businesses. Compliance is a problem. What say you?
Well, I'm going to agree with you because I'm an HR geek, and I love these statistics because it kind of proves my point, right? Yeah. All of these statistics prove, the points that we try to make, the education that we try to provide clients. And, it's really, I understand the compliance piece is hard for business owners, right, Mike? Because that's not what they do for a living. They make widgets or, they, provide insurance, but this is what the HR professionals do. Right. And, what I'm going to say is there are people out there looking at your ads, just looking to sue you because your ads are not compliant. Right. So there's federal regulations, right? You can't run your ads should not be, running afoul, for the protected classes, race, color, creed, religion, sex, age, right? So, one really, really common one for a restaurant is to say, we're looking for waitresses, right? What's wrong with that, Mike?
You've gendered your criteria.
Exactly. Right. But, these things happen, right? Recent college grads apply, right? That's going to have a disparate impact on an older person. And I will also say that when I look at ads for compliance with employers, one of the other things that I look at is when it says, must have a college degree. Give you a true story. How about must have a high school degree for a janitorial position? Well, when a gentleman was not hired because he did not have his high school diploma for that janitorial position, the employer must prove in a court of law, because he took him to court and said, why do I need a high school diploma for the janitorial position? All of the responsibilities that you have here, I fulfill except for that one. Prove And the onus is on the employer to prove why you need a high school diploma for that janitorial position. Now, there may be janitorial positions out there, Mike, where you do need a high school diploma. This one, they did not. So, what we're trying to help with is all that compliance to make sure that, number one, if you're in a state with, pay transparency, that you're posting the pay and posting it appropriately, because there's more to it than meets the eye. We've spoken about it on other webinars, but, this goes deep and long. If you're a government contractor, you have a long statement that goes at the end of every single one of your ads to meet the affirmative action plan requirements. But I would put on every ad equal employment opportunity, just to help the compliance piece. But there's a lot to it, Mike. It takes some real consideration to make sure that your ads are compliant.
And Mary, you and I have done episodes of the show just on this topic alone, so we don't have to go super deep. But maybe paint a picture for folks who maybe have not heard those episodes about the trends. What's the trend when it comes to the ads that you put out there, and what the requirements of those ads are, where that seems to be moving. But then also, what's the consequence of doing it wrong, right? You mentioned correctly, there are trolls out there that are just looking for illegal postings saying, "Ooh, there's somebody we'll file suit on them and we'll get them to settle out of court and take their insurance money." That's a real thing. But paint a picture for the overall direction this is happening in the marketplace, but then also the consequence of doing it wrong.
Yeah, so the consequence is real, right? These fines can be up to $50,000 if you're found in non-compliance. And, the other downside of it is, who are you missing? What candidates are you missing by putting discriminatory or non-compliant wording in there, right? i.e. the example of mandating a high school degree. And let's face it, Mike, it's probably more common now to mandate a college degree. Now, I was speaking with somebody high up, very successful at an organization the other day, that did not have a college degree. Had he applied for that position today, he'd have to have a college degree. But the onus is on the employer to prove, why does he need a college degree or a certification? You're missing out. You may be missing out on some good candidates, number one. But the real downside is that the fines can be enormous when you're posting non-compliant things that are discriminatory in any way, shape, or form, or not fulfilling state or federal laws like a pay transparency law.
Yeah, and it sounds so. I know it can sound trite. I think it's just so real. It's just so simple. You and I, every time we talk, it all comes back to job descriptions. If you have job descriptions that really are tied to what are the actual skills, actual competencies required to perform the job, all goodness flows from that in the job description, in your
Very true.
If you're using applicant tracking systems. So even if your ad is compliant, but you're using college degree as a way to filter, you're still discriminating. It's harder to catch you probably, but you're still discriminating. But from the ad to your applicant tracking to your onboarding and training to your performance management process, it all flows from that. So, okay.
Very true.
Last stat. This is a big gap on recruiting before we move to hiring. So 73% of fast growth companies, and we did a whole webinar on this. 73% of fast growth companies have a formal employee referral program to attract new talent. Only 45% of the down year companies have a formal referral program. It is one of the easiest things to do. There's ways to do it right and ways to do it wrong. We won't go deep on that. Go watch that episode. But 73% versus 45% have employee referral program. Oh my gosh, it's almost a 2x difference between the fast growers and companies who are not growing. They're shrinking.
Yeah. No surprise.
It feels obvious, but why is it so important? Why is that stat so important, Mary?
Well, I think, for a lot of reasons. But number one, I think when you have a nice employee referral program, I think it helps the engagement of your employees. Like, oh, you care about me referring people that I know. I feel like they're engaged, number one. Number two, it saves you money, right? Because maybe you don't have to use the job boards as much or a recruiter as much, right? Because you have a healthy employee referral program. I can tell you we've been very successful here at Asure by doing this. And I also think that statistic is widespread because the fast growing people are increasing staff appropriately and timely, right? The people with the down year, just in this economy, the current economy, are just not bringing people on fast enough or the right people. And an employee referral program, if it's done right, again, watch that episode. If it's done correctly, can really help vet the candidate, let's say, to become an employee because you have a really strong reference on the person already because somebody who works for you, who knows your organization, right? We say all the time, the person can do the job. Can they do it here? That question is already answered most of the time when you have a referral program that is explained correctly, incentivized properly, and you have some guardrails on it to make sure that it also does not cause, discrimination, that it helps with your diversity, doesn't do the opposite.
Right. I love it's going to be hard for me not to go down a path of recreating that episode.
I know.
I love the first thing you said. It's like, you think, what's the purpose of an employee referral program? Well, it's I have openings. I need to fill jobs. And so, yeah, duh. And there's the employee vouches for another word. There's a good vetting process. There's a validation. There's but the first thing you said, I think so many times people miss, you're showing respect to your current employees. Maybe the reason, and I'm maybe going on a limb here, but maybe the reason the fastest growing companies have employee referral programs is because it makes their current employees more productive because they feel more bought into the culture, right? They have a voice in the business.
You're correct.
Right? It's not because that I have 10 employees and I hired the one and that one was so much better because it came from an employee referral that now I'm a growing company because that one. It's the other 9 who feel bought into the process in participate in creating a culture that they want. It's those 9 who are more productive, the reason you're fast growing, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of feeding on itself, right? Because if you have a strong culture where you're supporting your employees, they want to refer their friends because they love working with you. I mean, that's my team. I would say 25% of my growth on my team and at Asure, we're pretty high statistically as well. It's a great place to work. So people want to refer their friends to work here because they love it. And they're like, you're going to love it. And it makes for, just, and I think that's the same for a fast growing company. You can't have a really negative culture and be fast growing. Not going to happen.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to switch to the survey. Again, it was 8 sections, 5 questions each. So we covered the first section, which is recruiting. So the next section is hiring, the actual hiring process. I love this quote from Marissa Mayer. She's a former CEO at Yahoo, executive from Facebook. She says, it's about getting the best people, retaining them, nurturing a creative environment, and helping to find a way to innovate, right? So It's not just enough to find them in the recruiting process. Now we're actually going to talk about hiring, right? Um, and here's a stat that I think people might just not think about. So 83% of the fast growth companies send written job offers that include pay rate, pay frequency, leave benefits, and at-will employment. Just 66% of the down year or flat companies do the same. So 66% of flat and down year companies do send job offers with all those things, probably because that just seems like a pretty reasonable thing. 66% is clearly a majority. Right. But it's a big gap between 66% and 83%. That means the fastest growing companies, it's not just that they have better processes to recruit the best people. They're meticulous in their processes in expectation setting from the jump, not from day one, from pre-day one. If I give you a job offer, I'm spelling out clear expectations for what this job is. So, I mean,
that's right.
Expand on that, Mary. What do you think explains the increase in productivity? What is it? It's almost 20%. So 15%, 18% improvement for the fast growers versus down year companies by just something as simple as a written job offer.
Yeah. I mean, listen, and again, this is going to sound trite, but you only get one chance to make a first impression. And a written job offer shows the professionalism of the organization. It also starts the employee on the right foot, right? I was in an interview. I heard a lot of things, right? You got a lot on your mind. You're probably not taking notes about, leaves and benefits and all this information. It starts that employee off on the right foot. They understand when they're going to get paid, how much they're going to get paid, when can I take a leave? What are the benefits that I have? And of course, at will employment. And there's a compliance piece to written job offers as well. We are editing these all the time for employers. It could be something as simple as when you state all of these benefits, you always want to say these benefits may change at any time for any reason. I've had employers just state, right, that, maybe they have this wonderful, full pay medical or something,
right,
super generous like that. And then they go to change the plan and people are like pulling out their job offers and going, not for me. Mine says this. So I do want to caution our listeners that there definitely is a compliance piece to everything. But those fast growing companies are more professional. It's more succinct. You're starting that person off on the right foot, right? Because a lot of employees will leave in the first 3 months because they're like, I don't even know when I get paid. There's just so many negatives that, that they, want to make sure that, or that organization wants to make sure there is no questions or there's a minimum amount of questions. Just makes you look more professional.
I mean, it really is as simple as that, right? I mean, it's more professional. It sets better expectations. Probably feels weird even spending this much time on it, but the fact is, it's a huge gap. 66% of companies who are shrinking or flat do it. 83% of fast-growing companies. This isn't a sample size of 10. This is 2,065 businesses. That tells you something, right? There's value in it. Okay. In something I think about, Mary, it's not even that there's value in it. Sometimes I almost think like these HR practices are symptoms more than their root causes. So like, if you're a crappy boss who's terrible to your employees, are all of a sudden you're going to be a growing company because you start writing all this stuff down? No, but people who care about their staff and are forward leaning in their people practices and want to do their very best, a natural outcome is things like using job boards, applicant tracking, written job offers, right? I almost think that like what comes first, chicken or the egg here? What comes first
Yeah.
is the desire to treat people their very best with respect and find the best people and create a company that values people. And when you do that, these best practices follow. It's not the other way around, but certainly there's a correlation, right? Okay.
Oh, there's definitely a correlation. And, being the HR nerd on the call, I would say, there's a right and a wrong way to do all of that. Like, so what does that mean? Treating people with respect. I think all of these things that we're covering is treating employees with respect and being professional. So it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah. All right. Next one. 75% of fast growth companies have written job skills and competencies. So not the job offers. They have 75% of the fast growers have written job skills and competencies for interviewers to assess their candidates. Only 55% of declining businesses have written job skills and competencies for interviewers. So I come back to, I won't steal your thunder. It comes back to job descriptions, right? So
Okay.
Expand beyond just the job description itself. What is it about having the skills and competencies written down, not just written down, but for interviewers when assessing their candidates?
Yeah. So I'm going to get on my compliance bandwagon here, but right. Let's just start with the obvious. The obvious is if we have specific questions that correlate to the skills and the competencies that we're looking for, we can mine for the best candidates for the job. Again, it sounds pretty simple, but I'm a big fan of writing these questions down for all of our interviewers, right? Because they're going to forget them, and there should be a lot. But from a compliance standpoint, Mike, every single candidate should be asked those core questions. You're going to vary, right? And that's in our other webinar we did on interviewing, because I'm going to ask you questions that are on your resume as well. So I'm going to vary there. But these core questions need to be the same. Number one, so that I can compare two candidates on, level playing field, right? How do they meet the skills and competencies? Number two, so that we can be, and maybe more important, so that we can be compliant. I'm not asking, for example, the female candidate if she has coverage for the weekends, and I'm not asking the male candidates.
Yeah. I love competencies because to me, there's like you naturally gravitate towards the compliance side. I naturally gravitate towards the productivity side, but it's two sides of the same coin, right? And so when you have a focus on skills and competencies, and then you're asking questions, hey, tell me about a time when you did such and such, so they have to demonstrate to you that they actually have that competency. It kind of and if you have a list of those, that fills up your hour or 30 minutes or 2 hours, however long your interview is.
Yeah.
To, dare I say, keep you out of trouble from asking stupid questions like, tell me about your family, Mary. Where do you come from? I mean, you might be just innocently trying to get to know the person, but that's how you get in trouble, by asking questions that, people aren't trying to do harm. They're just trying to get to know folks, right? But they get themselves in trouble all the time. And if you focus on competencies, you are gonna find candidates who are not just good interviewers, but actually have the competencies required to perform the job. And at the same time, it's going to keep you out of trouble from a compliance standpoint.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. That was a huge one. So recap it. 75% of the fast growers write down skills and competencies for interviewers. This is for the interviewers to assess candidates. Only 55% of the declining businesses. Okay. Next one. Compared to other companies, the fastest growing businesses are 13% more likely to have a formal interview process that is consistently used with every candidate. So 13% improvement when they have a formal process for every candidate. Why do you think, why is it that the fast growers are better at having a formal process? And when I say better, the data says it's better, but why?
I think the key word there is process, right? So we need to follow a process instead of doing this haphazardly, because certainly because, I keep going back to the economy right now, it's hard to find people. But even when it's not hard to find people, we need to take all of the pieces that we're talking about, using the job board, possibly a referral system, definitely having the interview questions listed, right? Who is interviewing the candidate, right? So what am I looking for, right? When I'm interviewing a salesperson, do I want them to do a preview of how they would sell my product? Do I want them to go on a ride along to see a client, right? So that they can get a good job preview, so they can select in or out. My formal interview process is going to look different for different organizations, and it's going to look different for different positions within the same organization. But you need to have a process. You need to be consistent for the compliance side, but you also need that consistency so that I can compare Mike to Scott appropriately, because I went through the same process. That's why we have processes, right? Right. And I'd add to that formal interview process that what is my communication to the candidate? You can lose candidates very easily. If you remember way back when you were interviewing, Mike, what would happen sometimes is people would interview you, and then you feel like a jilted lover. You're like, they're not answering my emails. I haven't heard from them. Do I have the job? Do I not have the job? Yeah. Well, half of your candidates right now are going to go, well, I'm going to take one of these other 3 offers I was asked, or I don't want to work for that organization because there is no process there, which means there's no communication, right? So part of your formal interview process is, how are we communicating? Who's, the central person that's saying, hey, Mike, thanks for the interview with Scott. We'll get back to you in about a week. We'll get back to you this way. This is what's going on. You need to keep that communication going, or you are losing that candidate.
Yeah. I mean, this is not 2009 when there are, a bunch more candidates than there are job openings. Unemployment right now is under 3.4%. In some places, depending where you are, it's lower than that. This is a candidate's world, right? So how you treat them in the process is really important. And I think you were spot on when you said the key word here is process. You can't measure the effectiveness of your hiring, whatever you call it, if it's not a process, right? I'm a marketer. I think about, okay, how many impressions on a website? How many of those convert into leads? Some of those leads convert into sales. What's the average dollar of those sales? How long do I retain a customer? It's a mathematical formula, and I'm always trying to optimize. Same thing here. It's like of the number of how many candidates do I get to look at me? How many of those are qualified? What sources are those coming from? Right? And you should be quantifying and measuring this. But if you don't have a process, including the interview process, you can't optimize to make it better. Which means
that's right. And this is your first impression, right? If you don't have a formal interview process, right, are you giving them the link to your website so that they can read more about the organization? Are you giving them, for in-person interviews, I've talked about in the past, give them some swag. Even if they don't get the job, I want them walking around with a short sweatshirt or t-shirt on, right? So, how are you attracting the candidates? And that formal interview process, again, goes back to professionalism and making a good first impression.
Yeah. All right, next topic here. 80% of fast growth companies conduct pre-employment background checks, where only 66% of companies that were down or flat conducted background checks. So 80% of the growers, the fast growers, do background checks. 66%. So it's still 2/3. It's the majority, but there's still a big gap. 66% versus 80%. The 66% flat or declining, they do background checks. So what's the magic here about background checks?
Well, I think that it's pretty obvious, but you're making a better hiring decision based on having some employment background checks being done, and then you have, organizations such as banks and, healthcare has their own checks that they may need to do. Banking may need, to bond employees. So you got a background check there. So some businesses, will constitute that you have to do a background check. But even for the other businesses, you're just making a more informed hire by doing background checks on the candidates. They're going to stay with you longer, and you can rescind offers when those background checks come in, and they're not appropriate. I'm going to put some guardrails around that. You have to be compliant as always, but it's a really, really, really good check and balance to do a background check. There's no question.
And I can't help but kind of come back to this whole cause versus effect, chicken egg kind of thing. It's like, I think you just made a really good case of why, you should do background checks. I mean, will you be as productive of a company if you make a hire or two that turn out to not be who they said they were or whatever? But I also just think, what's your mentality? Are you, if I'm an employer and I think, I just need a warm body in there. Then am I going to have the mentality of that's worth the extra little bit of money? It costs money. It's not a lot of money, but it costs money to do background check. It's like, I'm just looking for a warm body. People are people. Versus those who are willing to invest. And so maybe the actual background check doesn't offer huge value in and of itself. Maybe it's the mentality of the employer who is willing to invest and wants to just do everything they possibly can to ensure that they have the right people in the job to grow the company, right? I mean, I think it's both. I think you made a really good case for why it's important. But I think these things go hand in glove, right?
I agree.
Okay. So interesting. So we talked about recruiting process, all these stats of why the best, what the fastest growing companies do versus those companies with down year or not growing. But everyone kind of equally sucked at compliance. Guess what the survey told us around hiring? Same thing. So 15% roughly of all companies that we surveyed, over 2,065 respondents, 15% of all companies we surveyed may have inadvertently been asking illegal questions on job applications. Okay. So 15%, that would say 85% of people are doing it right. But
I'm going to challenge that.
You and I both know that's probably not true, but they believe it's true. But I almost think it's almost a moot point whether it's true or not, because the fast growers with the great people processes, the people who are declining or not growing with not as good of people processes, they both kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, I don't know. Right?
Yeah. Well, and look, they wouldn't be doing it if they thought it was illegal. So that's why I think that's understated. And I will just tell you that one of the first things I ask an employer is, do you use a job application? Can I look at it? And I will tell you, my own little statistic is 80% are not compliant. Right. And, it's kind of the soft things. One of the really popular things that I see is they ask for your social security number. It's an application, Mike. It's not new hire paperwork. So you haven't hired the person yet. So you shouldn't be asking for a social security number. You don't want that data sitting around in your computer if you do it virtually or in an office, because you don't want that stolen and that to, be harmful to that person. So that's the first one that I see all the time. I've seen birth dates. I've seen asking for graduation dates and that leads to, age, right?
Right.
Again, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, tell people why that might not be obvious to everybody, but you answer what I was going to ask. It's if you ask somebody's birthday, you might think that's a legitimate question to ask, but now you're opening yourself up to age discrimination.
Right. Absolutely. And, believe it or not, even in this day and age, I certainly have seen, for your government contractors, they may ask you to voluntarily tell your race, and that's okay. If it's voluntary. If it's mandatory, then that's a problem. And the other one that I see all the time, Mike, is, are you a U.S. citizen? So erroneously, employers think they can ask that because they're like, well, they have to be able to fulfill the I-9. But the compliant question is, are you eligible to work in the United States? Even if you're not a citizen, you can be eligible to work in the United States. You can ask that. Criminal history in most in many, I'm not going to say most, in many jurisdictions right now, you cannot ask criminal history. And you can't ask anywhere about criminal history. You can ask about felony convictions in some states. But, I'd be very, very, very careful with that. I've even seen applications, Mike, that say marital status. And so there's a lot of things on an application that may not be applicable. It may not be applicable to all candidates, right? So, one of the trucking companies that I have has, do you have your CDL license? And they have office workers. I'm like, why don't we just create 2 applications, right? We don't need to know. They don't have to have their CDL license. Right. So really important to look at those applications. And by the way, if you give the application to one candidate, it goes to all candidates for that job. You might say C-level doesn't have to have an application, but everybody else does, but just be consistent.
Yeah. Okay. So to me, the kind of the punchline here is those, whether you think it's chicken or the egg, either we're the kind of company that we value people, we strive to get the very best people, we think people make the difference, and the result is great HR practices, or they have great HR practices, which leads to a great culture and great people. It's both. They go hand in glove. And it's clear in the data, 2,065 small businesses who responded, the fast-growing companies are forward-leaning when it comes to HR. They have the best practices implemented to a greater extent than companies who are flat or shrinking. And fast-growing, growing, flat, and shrinking companies, not equally, but pretty equally, struggle with compliance, right? Yeah. No one can keep up, right? Okay, Mary, super fascinating topic. We're going to talk about our next 2 sections of the survey in our next webinar. Is there anything you'd want to say in closing here as we wrap on recruiting and hiring?
Only that the statistics don't lie. So everything that you and I have been talking about, what I really love about this report is it really validates everything that you and I, all the advice that we've been giving is validated with this report. So I love this.
You know what? It's a great place to wrap it. I'll echo the same sentiment. I mean, I'm a data guy, right? I'm a marketer, so I like words and pictures and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm a data guy, and it's like prove to me. And a lot of times when I'm talking to you or another guest on the show, I'm pressing like, so what is it about that makes somebody more productive? And one of the things that drives me crazy as an entrepreneur is there's a lot of HR that is very black and white because it's the law. The Fair Labor Standards Act is pretty black and white on overtime and minimum wage and child labor, right? The Affordable Care Act, pretty specific on what is required of employers for providing coverage and reporting to the IRS, right? but there's so much about compliance that it's hard to pin down. It's a little bit like trying to pin Jello down. So like on your job descriptions, or excuse me, your job postings, your interview questions, it's not that a question in and of itself might be black and white illegal, but we just know from our experience that, asking that, you're going down a dangerous path because that could lead to such and such, right?
Right.
So if I'm an employer thinking, hey, well, I haven't been in trouble before, that's just some soft HR GUI nonsense. Here's the data. The data just doesn't lie. So, some surveys, you see on TV or the newspaper or something, it's, they polled 100 people and here's the result. This is over 2,000 small businesses. Yeah. The data is black and white. So hopefully everybody will read the ebook and read this report that we're publishing. Whether they watch here or read the report. This is real stuff. The data is clear. The most productive, fastest growing companies lean in when it comes to HR in their people processes. So, Mary, love talking to you. Until next week, when we're going to uncover the next two topics in the survey. So, thanks to Mary for joining, and thanks everybody else for joining us this week. Until next week.
At Asure, we build human capital management software and services that help 90,000 companies like yours attract, develop, and retain great people. Our low upfront cost and affordable subscription model allow you to save cash to invest in things that drive growth, not overhead. To learn more about how Asure can help you claim up to $26,000 per employee with the Employee Retention Tax Credit, automate your payroll, and build productive teams that are compliant with ever-changing HR laws, visit AsureSoftware.com.